And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we come to Chris's... When it comes to religion, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to faith or losing your religion, look no further than the incredibly intoxicating, incredibly disastrous, incredibly unhealthy, incredibly obsessive, incredibly economically bankruptcy, ridiculously, you absolute moron, you thick, worthless thing when it comes to Chris's relationship with video games. So, well, what else can I say, ladies and gentlemen? But, well, let's finish this. And Christian's father says it only takes a few hours for him to master an electronic game, and then move on to another. I can't master any of them. And a TV anchor woman on a younger Chris winning the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win sweepstakes. I know we've covered that before, but I want to emphasize again, one of the games that Chris wanted to get was Sonic, I think it was like Sonic Dash, or Sonic or Sonic Spinball Dash, or whatever. It was basically Sonic the Hedgehog if it was like a pinball platformer. It literally cost $50 back in, what was it, 1990 or something like that, or 91? Screw, no, it must have been like at least, no, probably like maybe 92 or something like that. Chris would have been at least 10 years old by that point. In case of cursory glance that this wiki did not tell you, Chris likes video games a lot. In fact, Chris definitely has spent more time on video games than any other activity or pursuit, including his love quest. He has said he spends between 2 and 4 hours a day playing games, circa 2010 is when he said this, and that figure is likely higher than what he admits to. Without delving deeply into armchair psychiatry, it is not hard to see why video games hold so much appeal to Chris. His brain is wired to operate according to absolute values and rigidly defined processes. This is one of the reasons he has so much difficulty in the real world. The rules keep changing on him. If he figures out the rules in the first place, in the artificial world of video games, the challenges are the kind that his inflexible mind is able to comprehend and surmount. There, the rules never change, and all he has to do is follow them. Reality isn't quite as simple as Chris likes to imagine it to being, which is why he spends as little time out there as possible. And will also consequently do things like this. The early years. Well, I guess you could say it gives new meaning to the phrase, the red ring of death. Hey? No? Just me then. Chris has been an avid gamer since a very young age. He first played video games on a Commodore 64 home computer system, before he was 8 years old. He had a Game Boy and a Nintendo Entertainment System, and he acquired more consoles and games throughout the 90s. According to the Solitude Chronicles, he has been a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog since the character's 91 debut for the Sega Genesis. His game collection really took off in 93, when he won his famous shopping spree. Okay, so he was 11 years old. Okay. In the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win sweepstakes, and added $1,000 worth of Sega games and hardware to his hoard. Chris's game collection. Which, again, there's going to be like a larger article on that if you were interested. Although the last completely reliable account of his collection dates back to all the way in January 2009, Chris owns, conservatively, nearly 850 different game titles across 20 different platforms. He sold off roughly 100 games in various trips to GameStop and local pawn shops during the late summer and early fall of 2010. But this hardly depletes the reserves at all. He also maintained an account with the mail-order rental service GameFly until August 2010. Sony consoles dominate Chris's collection. Counting the games he has downloaded through the PlayStation Network, nearly half of his games belong to the PlayStation family. Nintendo comes next, including more than 100 games for Nintendo's different portable platforms, and Sega bringing up the rear. While he owns every Sega console, short of an 8-bit Master System, and Sonic the Hedgehog is one of his favourite individual franchises, games for Sega collections make up less than 15 to 10% of Chris's collection. Well, assuming that Chris didn't just buy like multiple versions of the same game across different consoles, if that's... Well, it probably wouldn't be ridiculous to do that. Imagine buying things for system... Well, then again, this is the sort of thing that Chris did, but we'll get into that. Chris's violent hatred of the Xbox is well known, but he likely owns, or at one point owned, an original Xbox console. However, it is not known how much time he has spent on Xbox games. His eBay account shows that he tried to sell off a handful of Xbox games in the summer of 2008. The summer of his eBay sales also indicates that, in addition to owning at least one of every machine he owns games for, he has gone through at least 3 or 4 of Sony's original PlayStation consoles over the year. Wait, what the fuck was he doing if he was like... Hang on, let me see if I understand that properly. He has gone through at least 3 or 4 of Sony's original PlayStation... So... What did Chris do? Did he damage them? Did he, like, destroy them? What are you talking... Well, they could have been, like, I don't know, maybe wrecked in the house fire, but why on earth would you just own 2... I mean, I've still got my PlayStation 2 that I've had for 20 years. I don't really think it, like, plays many games on it nowadays and stuff like that, but it still works. So... I'm very confused. But then again, since a lot of the games you could actually just straight up buy, like on the PS4 or PS5 through the network store, it might not be too much of an issue. There are harder things to get your head around, I suppose. It is possible that he's had to replace a few of his infamously fragile apparatuses for overuse, but this could be an indication that he bought the systems and games in bundles. It is virtually impossible to gauge exactly how much money has been shoveled into Chris's game collection over the past few decades. Knowledgeable trolls, however, reckon that his physical collection of games and hardware represents around $20,000. His PlayStation Network downloads, meanwhile, can be accurately accounted for free. The bill is close to $3,500, and surely climbing all the while. One of the more grievous examples of Chris's video game-related overspending is his apparent ownership of at least 2 copies of the $80 Street Fighter IX 4's Collector's Edition, as evidenced by the 2 identical exclusive Ryu figurines he later sold on eBay. While it is possible that Chris received the second figure from an outside source or packaging error, his attempt to bribe Blue Spike with a copy of the game, and his habit of wasting money for no particular reason, led credency to the former theory. In January of 2015, it was leaked on the Cwiki forums that Chris had spent an absurd amount of money on Nintendo consoles and games, racking up 585 transactions in the last 4.5 years, or 150 payments a year. This list includes useless shovelware, virtual console games, and both versions of a game that he does not even like. Of these, 276 purchases are known to be handheld titles. 8 are known to be video game consoles, buying 4 DSs and DSi consoles. Why you need literally any more than 1 DSi is a very, very good question. I don't understand it. And besides, I remember I could go over like the list of like my collection. It's literally my PS2, my PS4, my DSi, and then I upgraded it. I traded in for the DSi XL in 2010, and then I upgraded that again and got the 3DS XL, and then I got the Nintendo Switch. In fact, yeah, it's literally been 10 years since. I may as well just go get it, actually, for what it's worth. I know, all this talk of video gaming. At one point, ladies and gentlemen, yes, I used to be playing video games very regularly as well, and, well, that's not really me anymore, or at least to a much lesser extent. I have to, like, literally wipe the dust from... Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is... basically the case for my 3DS XL, and I only bought my Switch like about 2 years ago, and God Almighty, it's a copy of Soul Silver in here, and it's a copy of 42 all-time classics, Bleach: The Blade of Fate, Pokemon Platinum, Mario Kart DS, Brain Training, Pokemon Black, and what was this? It looks like, I think it's like Mario Kart 7, I think. But yeah, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm 3DS XL. I literally got this like a week before I turned 16, and I actually cannot believe the fact that wait a minute, hang on. It's still look at that. It's I've literally I don't think I've opened this thing up since I can't delete it. Yeah, literally I can't quite remember. I think like I'm trying to remember at the back of my head when the last time I actually bothered actually playing on this thing. I'm thinking like maybe 8.5 years ago. At some point during like late 2015 was the last time I actually remembered using this. So this thing has basically just been alone in my room for like 8+ years, and plus, boy, that is a blaster from the past if ever I've seen one. That's that's actually quite that's a very nostalgic feeling for me. That just it's still, it works like an absolute peach. Anyway, so sorry, where were we? Okay, yes. The grand total cost of all of Chris's listed purchases is $7,460.43, or $1,657.87 a year. Keep in mind that 39% of the purchases Chris has on his account, such as Skylanders figurines, amiibos, and his Wii U Virtual Console purchases, are not yet specified, meaning that their cost is not included in this already insane... I know, right? I mean, if I was to give an estimation, ladies and gentlemen, maybe very, very roughly from the top of my head, all money I've spent on video games over the years, for my when I was a kid with my PS2, to my DS games, to the PC gamings, to my PS4, to my Switch, it must have only equated maybe nearly 18 years of like playing video games. So maybe possibly £400 or something like that. 400 pounds across 18 years. So let's see, 10, 240. Bear with me. Let's see, calculator. There we go. Let's see, 400 divided by... So about roughly 22.2 recurring pounds a year, which, again, that's not too bad, all things considered, I suppose. Keep in mind that 39% of the purchases Chris has on his account, such as Skylanders figure... Okay, apparently his main attention and fanboyism has shifted from PlayStation back to Nintendo for unknown reasons. This leak also revealed that Chris plays almost every game demo available on the eShop, Nintendo's online downloadable video game store, even if he has no interest in said game. This leak also confirmed he had bought every single Sonic game and primary Pokemon RPG, proving that he is still a major fanboy of both franchises, and also confirmed that he still makes many purchases multiple times over for no apparent reason, such as Wario's Woods. I don't know what Wario's Woods is, but Chris seriously must have one day just thought, you know what, I think I'll get that, just because he could. Chris does not do window shopping. He probably thinks that means you're literally going to buy windows. Possibly. Gaming preferences. Going on what evidence is available, such as what he has talked about on his websites and YouTube, what his PSN profile shows the most effort put into, and what he decides to construct elaborative fan works around, Chris has fairly childish casual taste in video games, though he puts an inordinate level of effort and time into gaming. He does so playing stuff like Sonic, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, Guitar Hero, and other games geared toward more mainstream and less hardcore audiences. His favourite racing game, Mod Nation Racers, is a straightforward title that allows players to create their own tracks and cars. Little Big Planet earned a rabid following for its level editor, but otherwise it is just another side-scrolling platform game. And Chris hardly strains the level editor to the limits of its potential. Most of his PSN trophy... Hang on, wait a minute. Did Chris never ever played Super Mario Maker, did he? Because I would have thought that's the sort of thing... I mean, I have a copy of like Super Mario Maker 2 and all that, but I'm surprised Chris never thought about, I don't know, just making his own levels just for people to... It's again, one of those things I felt like would have been a slam dunk when it comes to Chris, but... Never mind. Much of his PlayStation Network trophy case is filled out with achievements obtained by playing simple downloadable demo scenes and indie pop productions. Chris has purchased a fair share of M-rated games over the years, such as Family Guy, the video game, Grand Theft Auto, and Call of Duty, which shows that his interest in games is not necessarily limited to the E rating. These games, however, tend to be fairly shallow in terms of gameplay. Brutal Legend isn't remarkably deep as far as gameplay is concerned. While the game is an M-rated title with swearing, decapitations, heavy metal music, and tricky real-time strategy elements, for the most part, the atmosphere is still jolly and humorous enough, and the majority of gameplay consists of exploring the world and having straightforward beat-em-up fights. Some have questioned whether or not Chris's interest in Brutal Legend was because of an affinity for director Tim Schafer's other quirky offbeat games such as Psychonauts and Grim Fandango. While Chris might be drawn to the perceived random access humour of those games, it is more likely that they were too intelligent for him, and thus hold no appeal to his childish mind. Chris's interest in Brutal Legend was most likely due to Jack Black voicing the main character, and possibly his failed attempts to be seen as a connoisseur of music. Though why exactly Chris thought of Brutal Legend when he says he hates heavy metal music, that's a good question that we're probably never going to know the answer to. The games that Chris owns are not necessarily the games that Chris plays, however. His PlayStation Network downloads strongly suggest that he spends money on his gaming hobby more or less out of compulsion. Witness the $65 he spent on downloadable content for Disgaea 3, a game he had only played to 7% completion several months after originally buying all those downloads. It is reasonable to assume that Chris has similar spending habits in real life, a theory bolstered somewhat by his retro game collection and a house full of junk. Chris's collections of games for the Sega CD, Saturn, and a couple of other now-dead consoles are dominated by bargain bin trash, extremely common or poor quality games that are easily bought at low prices. No knowledgeable gamer would ever pay money for Power Factory featuring C+C Music Factory, except maybe as a gag gift. I've never even heard of that. But Chris apparently thought it was worth owning. This habit seems to be picked up from Barbara and continues to this day in the form of eShop shovelware and virtual game console downloads. His collection does a good job of telling us what sort of games Chris does not play though. Outside of the Pokemon series, for instance, he evinces no interest in role-playing games. Most of the non-Pokemon RPGs in his collection, like Suikoden and Final Fantasy VII, are PlayStation retro releases he impulse bought through the PlayStation Network. Chris buys those up like penny candies. He has even downloaded several digital duplications of PlayStation games which he already owns physical copies for. even during his short Hyperdimension Neptunia phase in late 2017. He only showed an interest in the anime adaptation of the games and has never shown any indication he has either been interested in or played the games. Which is a bit of a shame, to be honest, because one of the games that... there was a time when I was a fan of the Hyperdimension series as well, and I only really stopped getting interested in it just when, I don't know, I was caught in the middle of so many other things at once, and I had to prioritize certain things. That's kind of really when I stopped playing video games as often as I did. It was just because, again, I was graduating from university in a couple of weeks from that point, and I had to focus on, getting myself a job in the real world, which is why I haven't completed Cyber Dimension Neptunia, it's basically something equivalent to a parody of Sword Art Online, which is really funny because you've got literal video game CPUs, which are the manifestations of consoles, playing actual video games. They even make several tongue-in-cheek jokes about it, about the fact that they're literally just sitting next to each other whilst playing this game. And I only bring Cyber Dimension up because it has a very, very different style of gameplay, because it uses Unreal Engine, which for the avid enthusiast is the sort of thing that Fortnite was made with. They both use the same video game engine, and the actual gameplay itself is more akin to something of World of Warcraft, where you have to select between spells and abilities, and you get they get a reward system in which you defeat a certain thing or collect items, circa the likes of Dark Souls. So there's several little mini different elements that go into these sorts of things, and if you've never played it for yourself, I would recommend it. It's actually quite an interesting experience, to say the least, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Despite being obsessed with Pokemon, he is not a hardcore Nintendo fan as some might suspect. He never seems to show interest in the latest content from Nintendo, and the hardcore Nintendo gamers or games he does own, such as games from the Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, and the Mario franchises, are most likely just collecting dust on his game collection racks. However, a January 2014 leak of a Nintendo employee revealed that Chris had, in fact, returned to his Nintendo roots, buying nearly every single game on the eShop. He owns almost no sports games. In the mailbag, he once noted that sports titles do not really thrill me, although he did not exactly explain why. Though there's reasons to suggest possibly why. I mean, if somebody said to Chris, "We fit," then probably not. With a few exceptions, Chris has no apparent interest in video games marketed towards his own age group, which is, unsurprisingly, hardcore games aimed at adults are games that simply would not interest Chris because of his juvenile mindset. Video games, and anything else for that matter with mature themes, are not two-dimensionally crass and full of random access humour, would probably confuse and bore Chris and make him feel awkward and uncomfortable. Adding to the fact he probably would not be able to get very far in the game, this is supported by the fact that he did not try out BioShock, a first-person shooter with RPG elements, but only for a short time and never touched it again. Most likely, the whole game itself flew right over Chris's head, and he decided to play some Wheel of Fortune instead. However, ever since his sixth declaration that he has left the internet in late 2010, some more high-profile games aimed at adults have appeared on his PlayStation Network trophy list, such as Grand Theft Auto 4 and Fallout New Vegas. Apparently, the Hannah Montana PlayStation 3 game is no longer enough to fill his abundance of free time. And he has taken to playing games he would not normally be doing anything else with his life. While he sometimes gets tagged with the Weeaboo label, Chris does not appear to prefer games made in Japan over any other part of the world. In fact, his favourite games of 2008 to 2009, the period where he has told us the most about what he plays, are pretty evenly divided between Japan, likes of Sonic and Pokemon, the United States, Guitar Hero, Brutal Legend, Canada, Mod Nation Races, and Europe, Little Big Planet. He counts a few Japanese Game Boy and Nintendo DS imports in his larger collection, but they are obviously titles he picked up to try and impress/bribe Megan Schroeder. Makes sense. Almost all of them are spin-offs from popular animes, especially magical girl series like Sailor Moon and Pretty Cure. When Chris and Megan still got along well together, they were serious players of the arcade version of Soul Calibur 3. There is also an arcade in Chris's plans for the Quickville shopping centre. However, given Chris's inclinations to retreat into the comfortable confines of his bedroom, the chances he goes to arcades are slim. And they're still quite popular in some ways, arcades. Probably maybe not as big as they would have liked to have been, but for what they are still out there. Chris the Brave Console Warrior. Chris thinks the perennial console wars between rival manufacturers of game machines are extremely serious affairs, and engages in them with all the bile and fervour of a 10-year-old child soldier in the PlayStation army. On rare occasions, he has almost seemed rational in this respect, saying he just doesn't like or doesn't care much for the Xbox, but most of the time he does not mince words when describing the vile, loathsome and blatantly stupid Hexbox, by comparison. He has waxed poetic when describing the awesomeness of the PS3, most prominently in his PS3 history level for Little Big Planet. According to Lucas, Chris would even express his fury over the Xbox in public while hanging out at the game place. It is hard to tell where Chris's religious devotion to the PlayStation comes from, but to call it religious is not hyperbole. Like his faith in God Jesus, his support for Sony is blind and unthinking, though he can come up with a small justification for his opinions in a pinch. Typically, he brings up the annual fee for online gaming on Xbox Live. That's a pretty good start. Chris shows no sign of having put any serious thought or research into his choice of consoles. His descriptions of the PS3's advantages in places like his Columbus Day 2008 video tend to sound like a collection of marketing buzzwords, as filtered through the mind of a cave-dwelling autist. But anyway, interestingly enough, Chris was not always a blindly devoted fan of Sony. In the Animal Crossing documentary, we see that back in 2003, Chris pledged his allegiance to Nintendo and the GameCube, stating that both the predecessors of the PS3 stank as much as the original Xbox. His feelings changed when he bought a PlayStation 1 at a rummage sale for cheap, intending to resell it elsewhere for profit. But instead, played it and found it was not bad. One would expect this to be a lesson against nonsensical brand loyalty. Oh no, it didn't. But instead, Chris just focused his hatred on Microsoft. Likely prior to this, Chris was a Sega fanatic at Nintendo's expense. If true, then it demonstrates how fickle Chris is regarding devotion. When asked what his thoughts were on the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo's up-and-coming console for 2017, Chris responded in Chris fashion and simply stated he had no thoughts on it due to being preoccupied. Where does it say stress? Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, and this also, again, gives a little bit more insight as to why I'm also covering this along with Chris's other religious devotions, because, well, outside of maybe his more vocational points of view, this is certainly one that goes into there. I'll probably cover, maybe the main parts of the love quest very shortly after, because I'm thinking more in aspects of, devotion it's more plausible to apply this to, so the more the merrier, I say. Unsurprisingly, Chris is ignorant of things he has chosen not to like. The only 360 game he seems to show interest in is Don't Be Nervous Talking to Girls, seen in Sonichu Issue 10, being modified for the PlayStation 3, was suggested to him by the fans. Though the game is just a crappy dating sim, and though there aren't other 360 exclusive games which would appeal to him, Chris claims that it is the only game worth playing on the 360. He has got to be joking. Even slying mud at the names of consoles is very serious business to Chris. In Lars's call, Chris says he does not like it when people call the PS3 the PlayStation Triple, because that is what trolls call it. Of course, this comes from a man who ceaselessly rants about the Hexbox. Oh, and by the way, yeah, this is him just saying, no thoughts, I have been preoccupied. That's all the time Chris could be bothered to give about an opinion. Chris and online gaming. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Chris, given his antisocial nature, Chris is not fond of online multiplayer games in any genre, be they sports sims, shooters, racing games, or whatever else. Though he owns several games for the PS3 and other consoles that would allow him to play online and interact with other people. His PlayStation Network profile shows that he has put little time into multiplayer games. In 2010 and afterwards, 2 exceptions to this rule emerged. He did a good deal of online racing in Mod Nation races during the summer of 2010, while early in 2011, Chris began to show an interest in online role-playing game for the first time, DC Universe Online. His fondness for Mod Nation competition eventually passed, but it remains to be seen whether or not he will develop a lasting interest in MMO gaming. I probably don't think so, because outside of the fact that even the subscription fee for something like World of Warcraft, I'm not entirely convinced Chris would just I don't think Chris has shown it. I mean, I've shown interest in it before, but the problem is that it would mean giving money to Blizzard, and Activision Blizzard, and I don't really want to do that because, listen, I used to play Overwatch, was like the only real big game I played during my time at university, and for reasons I don't exactly have all the time in the world to get into, outside of the other things that Activision Blizzard does, they will just disappoint you time and time and time again, including to the point of just ruining an entire game just to make more money. Anyone familiar with the disaster of Overwatch 2 will absolutely testify to how Blizzard because they couldn't just stick to a routine or stick to something that would make sense. They just put their time and resources into things, then lied about it, and then released, basically gave us all a worse version of a game that was, to that point, quite readily, received. It may not have been the best game in the world, but Overwatch was absolutely better than average. Dedicated observers of Chris's gaming habits may notice a bit of a paradox developing here. Chris claims to hate the Xbox 360 because Microsoft requires a $50 annual subscription fee for online multiplayer gaming. It is a mystery then why this would wind him up so badly, when he hardly plays any multiplayer games. But such is the nature of Chris. Mailbag correspondents have tried to point the seeming contradiction here, not to mention the weird contrast between Chris's thriftiness as far as Xbox Live is concerned, and the massive amounts of money he willingly wastes on worthless digital trinkets through Nintendo and the PlayStation Network, for all the good it has done, though may seem as well as try to change his opinion on Asperger's syndrome. Recently, Chris has started playing online games on his Switch and PC, playing titles such as Tetris 99 and Payday 2. Payday 2, I mean, I know what that, I think I know what that game is, but I've not heard that for at least nearly 10 years. That's pretty interesting, I suppose. Chris, the trophy whore. While Chris has little evident interest in directly interacting with other humans in online games, he does not seem to enjoy building up a massive trophy case to passively show off his PlayStation Network profile. He has doggedly played through a number of games in order to earn every available achievement, and on occasion he appeals to his fanbase for help in earning trophies. For instance, he begged readers on his Twitter feed to download the Mod Nation levels so that he could pick up one more trophy. Slacker that he is, Chris prefers to put forth as little effort as possible to actually earning his trophies. Presented with a trophy in Little Big Planet 2 that asked him to contribute a custom level to the game's online community. He fulfilled the requirement by uploading an empty level with no work. Are you kidding me? Did he really do that? Listen, I know I've spoke about Chris being lazy many times in the past, but that's quite an overstatement, that, ladies and gentlemen. He literally got a trophy in a video game for doing absolutely nothing whatsoever. When this level was deleted by the community's administrators, he took the non-easiest route possible and uploaded his old levels made with the first Little Big Planet. In an email to Jackie, he expressed great pleasure when the Mon Nation experience system was patched to make certain trophies easier to acquire. At last, somebody who doesn't have a job actually has cause to celebrate, ladies and gentlemen, as opposed to, actually doing something more practical with your time. Like, for God's sake, Chris, do some fucking work. Chris and PC games. Chris has games for personal computers are conspicuously absent from Chris's collection, and is evident from his game-playing habits. The only sign that he has ever owned an online game, to say the least, or PC games, comes from his eBay account. In the summer of 2008. He also owned, which shows off he tried to auction off a collection of a vintage copy of the first Lego of the vintage, a collection of vintage Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games for the PC in the summer of 2008. He also owned a copy of the first Lego Island game for the PC, as seen by his possession of the Infomaniac minifigure, which was only obtainable from early copies of the said game. In the fan mail reading video, after a fan sent him a copy of Half-Life 2, Chris explained, "I don't play PC games, I used to, but I don't anymore." He failed to indicate why he gave them up, and he failed to actually sound as though he actually was grateful for the fact that he received something for absolutely nothing. In his first Mumble chat, he claimed to remember Tohu, but later backpedaled and said, "I have never really heard of that." Due to the influence of the Idea guys and him acquiring a decent computer, Chris has picked up PC gaming. He has a Steam profile and has played Payday 2 at least. Chris, the industry insider. Chris gets most of his information about the gaming industry from comparatively mainstream sources. He was an avid reader of Game Informer magazine. As for publications and or other media sources that have since gone defunct, he was also a dedicated reader of Sony's online magazine Core, and recently followed the G4 cable network. Do you guys remember that? And the disaster that was when they tried to bring it back? He apparently even still took the Spike TV Video Game Awards seriously, which puts him about 5 years behind anybody with even a passing interest in the games business. Chris, the game designer. At various times, especially during the Miyamoto saga, but going as far back as the late 90s, when he had a prophetic dream of a Sonic game for the Game Boy, Chris has imagined that he could launch himself into a career as a game designer. It is telling, however, that nearly all of his ideas for potential video game projects simply involve swapping Sonichu or other Chris-spawned characters into an existing game concept. Pokemon Lightning version is a Pokemon RPG with Sonichu in it. Sonichu Adventure is Sonic Adventure with Sonichu in it. John's Custom Gundam Sisterly Rescue is Gundam. Journey to Jaboa with Mega. The closest he has gotten to coming up with something like an original idea is Christian Weston Chandler's Adult Chronicles, and it is not actually known what the game is supposed to amount to, beyond what Chris drew on the cover, and occasionally haphazard mentions. It is entirely possible, however, that the answer is unknown to Chris himself. Nevertheless, Chris sincerely believes that his characters and game ideas are ready for commercial success. He once rejected an email from the mailbag that brought up the notion of a not-for-profit fan-made Sonichu game and brushed off similar suggestions in his first IRC fan chat in the video about dispelling rumors of an official Sonichu game. He scoffed at the idea of his game's ideas being made with 2D graphics. Why this is, or maybe if it was for like any specific game Chris had in mind, is worth asking, but again, it's one of those things where Chris just straight up dismayed the idea of things that people did absolutely for free and in their own time for him. Modding and customization. One of the great ironies of Chris's existence is that he loves to create and share his creations. So far, so good. However, even though he possesses almost no genuine innate creativity, he tends to gravitate towards, or strongly towards, I should say, video games that allow him to create his own content and share it online. Since console games are often not modifiable, while PC games, the modding trends to demand more technical skill than he possesses. For example, there's an entire YouTube channel that is dedicated to people modding a version of Elden Ring so that they can have characters like Slave Knight Gale, the Orphan of Kos, and things again like the Dragon Slayer armor, all assets taken from different from software games to fight the bosses of Elden Ring. It's worth noting, well, again, Chris is not I don't think he's particularly into Elden Ring himself, but that could be that's just an example to say there. Chris has only been able to show off his creativity in this field so much. That said, the PS3 games Little Big Planet and Mod Nation Races exerted a powerful grip on him with their customization capabilities. Chris made a ton of levels in Little Big Planet, dropping out of sight for the better part of a month when he first acquired the retail version of the game. Likewise, he has made levels, characters and custom cars for Mod Nation Races, and it resulted in a similar disappearance during the summer of 2010. His output has not shown too much actual competence, but it is not for lack of time and effort spent. Even in games that offer only light customization features, Chris makes a point of personalizing his experience as much as possible. He spent considerable time on a Guitar Hero band, up to drawing disturbing pictures of his virtual bandmates. The amount of time he spent on tweaking his Animal Crossing villages is simply colossal. According to the Regina emails, Chris made a similarly big deal about F-Zero GX and Jet Set Radio, even though both games limit their customization options to things like swapping around car parts or personalizing small decals. Likewise, as the gallery below displays, Chris enjoys customizing his game's hardware. He has splattered Sonichu artwork all over his GameCube, a Nintendo DS, a couple of Game Boy Advances, a PSP, his now deceased original PS3, and possibly other consoles and handhelds. One of his Pokewalkers also appears to have received the Sonichu treatment, being repainted in blue and yellow. Chris became interested in Sonic the Hedgehog fan game and modding Project Sonic World in late 2020. After joining its Discord group, he requested creators make based on Sonichu and his female obsession at the time, Project SNT. In December of that year, Chris found a Sonichu mod and wished to add his voice acting into it. While he did not want to get into contact with the original creator and ask if he could add it to the mod, Chris opted going without permission and downloaded the mod, replaced the original voice clips with his own, and reposted it. Because of the original mod's appropriation, Chris was banned from the mod hosting website Game Banana. He was banned from the Sonic World Discord group for not long after due to his passive-aggressive yet megalomaniacal confrontation with the Sonichu mod's creator. Nothing new or out of the ordinary for Chris, but it's proof that, again, if Chris does not get his way immediately for all things, he will get mad. Chris's perception of video game technology. Chris obviously has no idea about how video games or video game consoles work. For example, as seen in a panel of Sonichu issue 10, he seems to think that games are interchangeable and can work on any console. Do not buy or download illegal copies of Little Big Planet on Wii or Xbox 360. It is punishable by law. Do you mind if Chris stops shouting at us? I'm not interested. I'm just sitting here just trying to enjoy my time. What? Calm down, Chris. What the hell? Even though he could easily check and see that he cannot play his copy of Little Big Planet on his Wii, although he is either too lazy or is afraid of having his house raided by jerk-ops. Neither is he aware of the technology's current capabilities. As stated in the survey of Chris in Reality, he once suggested that Nintendo should create a Pokeball peripheral which could display holographs, which can only be seen in science fiction. Currently. Decline of gaming passion. Chris's passion for gaming seems to have relatively subsided by the late 2010s. By 2020, it had been months since he touched his PlayStation 4 and has not shown much interest in the new PlayStation's first and third-party titles. A look at his then recent tweets about abandoned wish list suggested he was busy binging TV shows and movies. However, Chris continued to regularly play Tetris 99 on the Nintendo Switch from 2019 up until his arrest in 2021. On the 11th of September 2020, during Chris's phase of role-playing as Sonichu, Chris was asked the following question in Discord Q&A 6. Dear Christine, are you getting any of the next-gen consoles? If so, what games are you excited for? Chris responded, taking you mean the new PS5 or Xbox S generation of consoles, Mama had not really given that much thought, and I haven't as much either, considering we will be in the new timeline free of this pandemic and all of that. During the jail saga. During Chris's time behind bars, for perhaps the first time in his life, he was deprived of any ability to access his game collection. The various letters he sent to assorted acquaintances over the course of his confinement made little mention of his electronic hoard, and the status of his collection is itself unknown. While Chris, having been away from his home for the better part of 2 years at time of writing, it's been some time since he's been released and he has a Switch with him. We're not entirely sure if this is the same Nintendo Switch, although many would suggest it was a new Switch, but then why exactly would his consoles and games be taken away by the police for possession and stuff like that it's something I don't know. It's something that would have to go into more detail when it comes to the actual legalities of Chris's case. With Chris having been away from his home for the better part of 2 years, and reports that items belonging to him were thrown out of the house, there is every likelihood that the games and consoles he cherished so dearly and intended to pass on to his children of his own have simply been sold off, given away, or tossed in a landfill. However, in an apparent bid to make the most of his newly found freedom after his release in March 2023, he was swift to visit a local Walmart and purchase another Nintendo Switch, according to an eyewitness account. This account was swiftly corroborated by others who posted images of Chris's online activity, images that paint an unsurprising picture. Since his new acquisition, he has wasted little time catching up on the games he has missed. Pokemon is front and center, as screenshots of him playing playtime hours and tweets he has posted suggested he has purchased at least 4 games within that franchise since leaving jail, including seemingly both Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. More curiously, his PSN profile was spotted at being active online after years of silence in August 2023, showing that he was dabbing in with the demo version of Street Fighter VI on a PlayStation 5, despite stating on a November 2023 livestream that he does not yet own a PlayStation 5. This nevertheless proves that despite everything, Chris is more than willing to do what he always does, pony up hundreds of support of his passions, even in the face of an extremely uncertain future. Old habits always die hard, at least for Chris. And going a little bit further into this, we see there's things like a GameCube skin and a Game Boy Advance skin, and even like a Game Boy skin as well. Not to mention he even did a DS skin as well. And these are things that have actually worked, so can't exactly say it's actually quite impressive for Chris's capabilities. Then he also has a PlayStation Portable skin, and like several things revolving around like a Sonichu mod for the first Sonic the Hedgehog game, pictures of Chris's PlayStation Network account, and well, that's just about all we need to know at the moment. And for the time being, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Chris's tales and his relationships with video games. Basically, the one cult or sect, if you will, that Chris never really seems to ever consider shying away from, because it is just about the only thing he will hold dear and cherish, well, among many other things. And as we see right now, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of cherish, is that, look at that. Now, technically, there are like only a few more things we have to cover, like brand loyalty, and apparently, have some of these been updated since we last did them? Because all of them are now blue, when previously almost all of these were like purple. But anyway, so we have brand loyalty left to do. We also have, well, sports is something that's new, so that should be pretty interesting, especially as the Olympics are coming up. English, language, music, Spanish, and writing. So there's roughly about 5 more of these to go over. So watch this space, ladies and gentlemen, because we're not quite finished with Chris yet, and there's still a lot of things revolving around Chris's health that we have to cover. And I hope every single one of you has enjoyed this reading through Chris's foray into video games, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.